Rollins vs. Reigns. Backstage showdown. Rollins snaps. Reigns clash. Heated face-off. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What really happens when two people who have been intertwined in each other's careers for years finally end up face to face, away from the crowd, away from the music, away from the noise that usually protects everything they say and do? And more importantly, what happens when Seth Rollins looks at Roman Reigns in a moment where there is no script, no entrance, and no one to soften the truth between them? Because what went down backstage didn't feel like just another encounter on a wrestling night. It felt like something that had been building for so long that it was almost inevitable, like two storms circling the same sky finally deciding there is no more distance left to keep them apart. The arena is still alive in the background, faintly vibrating through the walls, the crowd still reacting to whatever just happened out there in the ring, but backstage it's different. It always is, quieter in a way that somehow makes everything louder, with people moving fast but pretending not to notice anything important, crates stacked, cables running along the floor. Production staff trying very hard to suddenly become invisible professionals who definitely did not hear anything happening. 2 steps away from them. And then Seth Rollins appears in that space, and you can feel immediately that something is off. Not the usual Seth energy, not the jokes, not the smug confidence, not the performer who knows exactly how to control a room. This is something sharper, something more focused, like he has already said everything in his head 10 times before even opening his mouth. He walks like a man who is not interested in conversation unless it leads to truth, and that alone is enough to make a few people backstage suddenly find urgent tasks that require them to look anywhere but forward. Because everyone knows where he is going. Roman Reigns is already there, calm, collected, standing like he owns the silence around him, not rushing, not pacing, just existing in a way that makes space feel structured instead of empty. There is always something unsettling about Roman when he is like this, because it doesn't feel like relaxation, it feels like control, like the room adjusts itself around him whether it wants to or not. Seth stops a few steps away, and for a moment nothing happens, no words, no movement, just history sitting between them like a third person in the conversation, heavy enough that even the air feels slightly tighter. Then Seth finally speaks, voice low, controlled, but carrying something underneath it that makes people nearby unconsciously slow down what they are doing. He says he is done watching Roman do this, and Roman doesn't react immediately, which is almost worse than any reaction he could have given, because that delay says everything about how much weight he chooses to assign to the moment. When Roman finally looks at him properly, it is not curiosity, it is assessment, like he is deciding where this fits into everything else he is already dealing with, and Seth notices that instantly, because Seth always notices when he is being categorized instead of heard. Roman replies in that calm tone of his, saying Seth always talks like he knows better, and that line alone is enough to tighten the space between them because it turns the conversation from current frustration into long-standing resentment. Seth lets out a short laugh that doesn't carry any humor in it, more disbelief than anything else, and he steps slightly closer, not aggressively, but deliberately, and that small movement shifts the entire energy of the hallway because proximity backstage is never just physical, it is territorial. He tells Roman this is not about knowing better, this is about Roman acting like nobody else exists unless they are aligned with him or under him, and now people nearby are absolutely pretending harder than ever that they are not listening, one guy literally walking past twice just to confirm what he already heard, because curiosity is stronger than professionalism in moments like this. Roman turns fully towards Seth now, and that change in posture is subtle but important, because when Roman gives full attention, it feels like a spotlight even without lighting. He says Seth chose his path, and that he should not confuse that with Roman taking his own, and Seth's expression shifts immediately because that is the kind of response that sounds logical on the surface but ignores the emotional weight underneath everything they have been through. Seth steps closer again, reducing space further, and says Roman changed the rules and then acted surprised when people stopped playing along, and now the tension is no longer just verbal, it is physical, not in violence yet, but in presence, in pressure, in the way two people occupy the same air like neither is willing to yield even an inch of it. Roman responds calmly again, calling Seth's need for validation his weakness, and that lands harder than anything loud because it reframes Seth's entire motivation as insecurity rather than resistance, and Seth visibly reacts to that, because nothing irritates someone like Seth Rollins more than being reduced to a simplified explanation. He answers that his weakness is thinking Roman would ever actually listen, and that line lingers because it shifts the argument from ego to understanding, or lack of it, and suddenly it is not just about control or leadership, it is about being heard at all. Roman steps forward too now, closing distance again, and the hallway feels smaller, like the environment itself is tightening around them, and someone in the background finally attempts a weak "hey guys" that immediately dissolves into silence because nobody actually believes they have authority over this moment anymore. Seth raises his voice slightly now, not shouting but breaking through his earlier restraint, saying Roman does not get to decide everything alone, that every time someone rises Roman somehow becomes the center again, and Roman listens without interruption, which somehow makes Seth push harder, because silence from Roman is never neutral, it always feels intentional. Roman finally responds with something quieter, saying things move, just not the way Seth wants them to, and that simple sentence carries a kind of finality that makes even the people watching feel like they are witnessing something that has no easy resolution. Seth exhales sharply, frustration building, and he steps even closer until there is barely space left between them, saying Roman genuinely believes that, and that is the problem, because belief like that becomes blind over time. Roman replies that maybe it becomes about him because he is the one still standing when it matters, and that line creates a pause so heavy it feels like the entire backstage area has momentarily frozen. Seth looks at him differently now, not just angry, but processing, because that statement is not just arrogance, it is conviction, and conviction is always harder to argue against than ego. He shakes his head slowly and tells Roman he does not even hear himself anymore, that everything has become centered around that mindset, and Roman responds immediately, telling him he is angry because he is not the center of the story he thought he would be, and that is the kind of line that lands like a punch without contact, because it challenges identity, not action. Seth almost reacts physically, and for a split second it feels like everything could escalate, but he holds it back, not because the anger is gone, but because restraint is still there even when emotions are high, and that restraint says as much as any explosion would have. Roman then says if Seth wants honesty, then here it is, Seth wants his position, not his story, and that distinction creates another silence that feels even more uncomfortable than the first. Seth finally laughs again, but quieter, more controlled, and tells Roman he does not want his story, he wants Roman to see that he is not the only one carrying everything, and that shifts something again, because now it is no longer about rivalry, it is about recognition, or the refusal of it. Roman replies simply, telling Seth to prove it, and that simplicity cuts through everything else because it removes argument and replaces it with challenge. Seth holds his gaze for a long moment, then nods once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of what comes next, and says he will, and that is the moment everything changes without anything physically happening. Seth turns and walks away first, Roman watches him go without calling him back, without reacting further, just standing in that silence again like it belongs to him, and the hallway slowly returns to motion around them as if reality is trying to pretend nothing significant just occurred. But everyone who was there knows it did, because moments like that do not stay contained, they spread, they echo, they resurface later in different forms, in different places, under different circumstances. And what makes this one stand out is not that there was a fight or a spectacle, but that there was something unresolved sitting right at the center of it, something personal enough that neither side could fully walk away from it cleanly. And if you are watching this thinking it is just another backstage segment, you are missing the part that actually matters, because this was not about winning or losing in that moment, it was about two people who understand each other too well finally saying things that cannot be unsaid. And honestly, you have to admit, that is exactly the kind of tension that keeps you watching, keeps you wondering, keeps you waiting for what happens when they meet again, because they will meet again, and when they do, it probably will not stay this quiet. If you have been following this kind of story, you already know how quickly things can shift in this world, so I want to hear what you think happens next, because this one feels like it is still in motion even after the scene ends. And if you enjoyed breaking this down with me, stick around, because there is always another layer waiting just under the surface in stories like this, and you never really know when it is going to break open again. Thank you for watching, really appreciate you staying all the way through, and I will catch you in the next one.